Our first speaker is Conor Kendrew, and he's kicking us off with a presentation entitled Rewilding and Its Place in a Sustainable Future. And I first met Conor 5 or 6 years ago when we were both on the same permaculture design course in Newquay, and Conor was then a volunteer at the Newquay Community Orchard. And what struck me most about him was his huge enthusiasm for anything natural, growing to the earth. And I remember him waxing lyrical about wild strawberries and how wonderful they were. And I've got wild strawberries in the garden, and I've never quite got his enthusiasm, but I do try. I do eat one from now and again and try and appreciate them, but they're just a bit sort of nothingish to me, I must admit. And he had his epiphany moment when he was on a field trip at Studland Heath, where he witnessed the session firsthand. And it was from there that he did his foundation degree, BSc and Masters in related subjects. And I saw him on a webinar towards the beginning of lockdown when we were just starting to plan this event. And I thought he would be the best person ever to kick us off. So over to you, Conor.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. No pressure there then, that's all good. And yeah, we'll have to have a chat about wild strawberries at some point because I think they're delicious, they're great. Okay, so good morning everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I can't express to you enough how grateful I am for being put on this fantastic board of speakers and being able to share with you my enthusiasm. My friends will get very, very tired about me talking about ecology non-stop. So as Lindsay pointed out to you there, first and foremost, since as I was that tall, I've always seen myself as an ecosystem ecologist. That is what I am. You're going to get a bit of an insight to ecosystem ecology today. I'm sure many of the people watching this today are already well up to speed on ecosystem ecology, but I'm going to relate the ecological processes that are going on within the movement of rewilding. Okay, so I have got a presentation. You don't just have to stare at my face all day. So I'm going to start sharing screen now. Okay, it should be coming up for you. Okay, so guys, if you want to keep a panel with my face on it, I would advise dragging that down to the bottom left-hand side of your screen because I've freed up a little bit of space down there, just so it aids the viewing for you guys, okay? So, rewilding, not just rewilding, but where it sits in a sustainable future. As we all probably know, we're in a bit of a pickle at the moment with the way that we relate to nature, the way that we treat it, and actually our philosophical makeup, or the way that we approach nature firsthand, all of which needs to change a little bit if we are going to live in a sustainable world. You can see there I've put re in brackets. Well, that's because although the world was once wild, the notion of actually going back to that type of wilderness is not entirely accurate. We're in a completely new world today. So although it would be wilding, it would be forward-thinking kind of wilding. There's no going back in nature. So today I'm going to pick apart why this gorse hill might make a little bit more sense to you in a context of rewilding. We're going to look at some of the amazing influences that ecologists and people interested in nature and rewilding can have on such ecosystems. And then we're going to finish off with my personal big interest, which is where do we fit in all of this? How do we find our human ecosystem and design that for maximization of resources in an uncertain future? So here we go. So first of all, we need to distinguish between wilderness, which is something that doesn't need our input, and rewilding or wildness. And Layla Abdelrahim here, she's a Russian anthropologist, fantastic, got lots of publications about rewilding and what it means to people. She says that wilderness is a cumulative topos of diversity, movement, and chaos. Okay, so that's the science of wilderness. But wildness is a characteristic that refers to a social environmental relationship. Okay, so this is about us as much as it is about nature. Okay, nature's been around as long as we have, and it will be there afterwards. But this is about how we connect with it. So rewilding is in fact not just reinstating wilderness, but it's our own social acceptance of that wilderness. It's us being able to find a comfort in the chaos that exists in self-organizing ecosystems. And that's a very powerful thing. Very, very few human civilizations have ever been comfortable with that. We've always seek to impose our will on nature to varying degrees. And for many of us, that has led to catastrophe and environmental overshoot. Rewilding really, I suppose you could state it as an idea of working with rather than against natural systems. Okay, so nature has processes, it has directions that it heads in. And historically, we've fought against those processes. We've been at war with nature, particularly post-Second World War. A lot of the ways that we've managed landscapes has been to use as much mechanization, as much chemistry, as many things to try and constrain nature to behave how we want it to. This is totally flipping that on its head. This is about working with those flows, those patterns that we see in nature. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. As a scientist, I think we can use the science of ecology to greater understand rewilding in the whole of society. So first, we're just going to take you through what a practice is, what the lifetime of a practice is, and how a practice might end up becoming more and more popular and eventually make its way into our culture. So this is really straightforward, to be honest. You can probably make it all out just by the little diagram I've done here. But a fad is always just something that lasts maybe for a few months. And not that many people get involved with it. Maybe a lot of us hear about it. So I'm thinking maybe when everyone started buying fidget spinners, for example, and flicking those around, you could maybe think that TikTok is a little bit of a fad at the moment. Not huge amounts of people involved in it, but certainly breaking onto the scene of society. We then move into a fashion. Okay, fashions could stick around for a number of years. A greater number of people get behind it, and for a select few of us, that is our identity, that prevails and becomes part of our makeup that we take with us forever. And then you go on into a culture, and now these are intergenerational practices that a huge amount of us, if not all of society, virtually tend to adhere to. And I would place, and hopefully a few of you would agree, I would place rewilding still at the moment in the fashion category. And that's not to say that it doesn't have the potential and it shouldn't become part of our culture, but at the moment I think that we're still sitting around about here. I'm sure for most of the people in this conference it's ready to be part of our culture, but I think in society at large it's still quite fashionable. So how do we go about making that transition? How do we make that big jump up? Well, for me, anyway, I see three main ways that could happen. The first one is through utilizing science, increasing everyone's understanding and knowledge of rewilding and the reasons why it is so necessary. The next one, which is one that I appreciate probably even more than the science, is people setting examples, people going out there, breaking new ground, people like Chris Jones, making great examples to go down in the history books and for people to react with positivism to it and go and do more of it. All the better if it adds up economically as well, as I'm sure we'll hear about today. And then the third and final one, which is a slightly more gloomy one, is that if those first two fail, maybe necessity will force us into some kind of a philosophical shift towards rewilding, towards harmonizing with ecological processes. That's the one that none of us really want to address or hear or even think about, but it's certainly one that could be on the cards in our near future. So, ecosystems, ecosystem processes, what's going on? Why does a forest look like a forest? Why does a estuary look like an estuary? Why did the Earth system function the way it does for millions of years and stabilize its environment? Do ecosystems have an agenda? Are there reasons for these patterns that emerge and these common grounds that we find between all ecological systems. Now, those are that they all adhere to the laws of thermodynamics. Okay, they're all sitting here with us on this dissipative system, miles and miles and miles away from the sun, getting energy pouring in. Okay, so we all live in this open system that is the Earth. We all, and they all, need to adapt to their surrounding environment. They need to evolve to make use of the nutrients available to them, make use of the physical processes, the bedrock, the wind, you name it. Everything needs to evolve around those parameters. And they are all made up of, all ecosystems are made up of a combination of living and non-living entities. Now, down here, you can see a diagram of the Earth system. So this is a way of drawing ecosystems. Ecosystems have energy going in, they have processes that go on within them, and then they have energy coming out. And a lot happens in between that. That's a very, very crude way of looking at an ecosystem. But essentially, this is layers upon layers upon layers. This is the biggest one that I can think of, and that is the Earth system. But even our gut, for example, our gut flora, that is an ecosystem in its own right. So all of these have those principles to them. Now, that doesn't really tell us about nature's agenda. That doesn't tell us about what nature's trying to do. Luckily for us, a fantastic ecologist called Howard Odum proposed what we call the maximum power principle. Now, if you're going to take one thing home today, it's to reread this maximum power principle as many times as you can. Because the maximum power principle states that during self-organizations, system designs develop and prevail that maximize power intake, energy transformation, and for those uses, they reinforce production and efficiency. So let's think about a forest for a second with that one. A forest, compared to a piece of gravel ground, which a forest could well have been a few hundred years ago, maximizes or makes the most use of the incoming solar energy that it possibly can. It holds on to nutrients in its soil. It holds on to water in its soil. It builds biomass in terms of the trees, but also in terms of all the animals that live within the forest. It takes in as much energy as it can, and it stores it for future use. Unfortunately, the landscapes we manage at the moment don't look anything like that. And a rewilding future would look much more down the lines of us reinstating ecosystems and allowing ecosystems to fulfill this maximum power principle. So another one that I want you to look at, I think is very, very important for understanding ecological succession and why a gorse-covered hill is not going to be a gorse-covered hill forever, and why that gorse is actually performing today. Within that paper, Gene Odum, Howard Odum's brother, talks about how all ecosystems, whether it is a microcosm existing for only 100 days or a forest existing for over 100 years, starts down here, okay? It starts with low biomass, nothing really going on. Primary production, so the production of plants, photosynthesis takes place, and so too does respiration. So you can think of photosynthesis as the total income, okay? Incoming energy being captured and taken into that ecosystem. I want you to think of respiration as maintenance, okay? Respiration maintains that, it puts it into those storages. You know, it creates and maintains the biomass. All the time, these things are increasing, and biomass, most importantly, is increasing, okay? It doesn't matter whether you're in a petri dish or you're in a forest. This is always going on, okay? It even goes on with ourselves, with your garden if you let it go, okay? And this biomass increasing over time, that is what brings us environmental stability. This up here, this sort of pseudo-climax community, the pulsing paradigm where we're flicking in and out of respiration and photosynthesis, this climax community, that provides the ultimate climatic stability. That provides the best soil, the best water quality, the best air quality. It has the most biodiversity that we can create once we start getting patch habitats emerging way into the future. this is where ecosystems want to end up. This is where the ultimate regulation takes place. And for me, these graphs, this type of science, this is the underpinning theory for why rewilding is striking such a chord with so many of us. Okay, away with the laser pointer. So this gorse field, in a short amount of time, could easily become this forest. Okay, and that is part of this process, part of one thing succeeding the other, and constantly going up that ladder of the maximum power principle, working towards a higher state of environmental control, environmental stability. And that's something that we really need to tune into, because we've been ignoring it for a long time. So you could say that when we adopt a philosophy of rewilding, when we start to think in that way, we start to use those principles, we go from an attitude of preservation and only operating at a very low level of efficiency and real potential, to realizing that restoration and allowing these ecosystems to express themselves will bring so many benefits that we can barely understand them. The other thing that goes on here, if we actually allow ecosystems to reiterate themselves, is that many more stabilizing features come in that we probably don't even know about. Okay, so we could enter a world of geoengineering where we try and control the climate, try and control the global water regime, but we're putting buttons and wires on things and we're taking control. And in doing that, we're saying, oh, well, I know what's going on. That's not necessarily true. We don't know what's going on. We're finding out new things all the time. These ecosystems are so adaptive in the way they stabilize the environment that really they've been doing it right for so long before we came along. This is the kind of thing we ought to be reinstating. So where do we fit in all of this? Where do scientists fit in? Well, here's a little analogy. How about if we think of an ecosystem as an orchestra? Okay, an ecologist can come in, and if we use the right science, maybe the right species, we can turn a year 6 recorder orchestra into something, grand orchestra at the Sydney Opera House. One of the ways that we famously are starting to do that is by introducing keystone species. Okay, a keystone species has a disproportionately large impact on the ecosystem within which it lives. Okay, so here's some excellent examples of keystone species. One in the middle here is very important and very close to home for us, the European beaver. That's actually not just a keystone species, but an ecosystem engineer. It actually has changed the very fabric and structure of the ecosystems it lives in. The sea otters here are a fantastic example in America of reintroducing sea otters, allowing their populations to boost again, managed to remove sea urchins from the bed and allowed kelp forests to reinstate themselves. And the third example here, I'm sure you're all aware of the wolves in Yellowstone National Park, which have brought about massive reforestation and huge benefits for that entire area, just by putting predator pressure back on. We also introduced things that we didn't necessarily intend to, some to a benefit of the environment and some to a negative impact on the environment. So we need to think about this. We need to think about what actually determines an invasive species, but what might determine a species that is perfectly fitted to the changing climate and the changing world that we're going into. I'm a big fan of sweet chestnut trees, so I'm starting to see that they might be well adapted to a 1 degree temperature rise that we're heading for at least. Okay, so that's how, very briefly, how scientists can influence rewilding as a movement. But what about our managed land? What about the fact that we need to provide our needs from the land? We need fuels, fibers, we need agriculture in order to survive. Well, how about the science of agroecology? How about practices like permaculture design, like agroforestry? All of these things that are taking those principles of ecosystem development and incorporating them into the systems that we design and maintain. This one on the far right of your screen there, that's myself in Dartington in Totnes in 2018. This sweet chestnut orchard will outproduce corn for protein per acre, and it has about twice the soil carbon that a cornfield has. No one needs to till it. You can actually graze the land as well, so there's multiple yields coming off of it. This sort of agriculture could bring huge, huge benefits for all of us. And it actually could mean, with the right agroecology, that we can produce the equivalent amount of nutrition, human nutrition, on a very smaller piece of land. Then all of that land that we used to manage is freed up for rewilding. So we need to think very responsibly about where our food comes from and how those systems relate to ecological principles as well. And then finally, our built environment. What about our built environment? I honestly believe that there is a human ecosystem. We need to recreate that. I think at the moment, the human ecosystem is reflective of one that has a massive energy throughput from fossil fuels, huge inefficiencies, and it's all very concretey and ugly looking. This development here is called Village Homes. So it's Village Homes Davis, if you want to look it up. It's in California in the United States. You can see there that it is a high density suburb, but about half of the food for all of those people can be supplied to them within that development. Okay, so it's a pedestrianized development where people have community gardens. They have their own back gardens. That's my alarm telling me that I've gone over. It's a fantastic thing. So look it up, Village Homes Davis. And these sorts of developments, this sort of retrofitting of our suburban makeup is a big, big part of our future, I'm sure. So rewilding in a sustainable future. Well, first and foremost, my biggest point to make today is that the science of ecology needs to influence the way that we approach all of our managed environments. That means using the science of ecology and the ideas of ecosystem development to redesign and retrofit our household and communities, change our agriculture. It's currently doing a massive amount of damage for the environment. If we just adopt those principles and use it in agriculture, it can bring huge, huge benefits for farmers, for our economy, for our food miles, and of course, for all of the environmental issues that we face today. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, wild land can return to the UK. We can step back. Once we start producing food on a smaller area, we can step back and say, nature, take your place, center stage. And we will all benefit from that, both personally by visiting it, but also as a society by yielding those environmental services, those ecosystem services. That's about it from me. I dare not run over anymore because we've got a stacked card today. If you wanted to get in touch with me about any of this, I am also, as well as working for Cornwall College, a freelance permaculture designer and ecosystem consultant. Whether you want research done, whether you want me to design your balcony or your 2,000-acre farm, I can do it. I apply all of these principles, and I'd be very, very interested to hear what you have to say. So thank you very much, everyone. I'm just going to stop sharing, and that's the end. Lindsay, I'm not entirely sure. It's a lot. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure about how we go through the questions.
We're doing the questions at the end, but if there were a burning question and we had a lot of time, we would take a question now. We've got 3 minutes, so technically we could. If there.
Okay. So yeah. Let's have a look then. Any Q&A? There we are. In a broadleaf woodland setting, are you able to recommend understory plants for agroeconomy? Yes. So plants is quite a tricky one. So if you're on about a cropping system, there's quite a few understory vegetables that you can grow. So if you whack a polytunnel in there, you can grow wasabi in quite heavy shade, and that's a good crop. You can grow a plant called udo, which is Aralia cordata. A lot of people plant it in their gardens, but in Asia it's valued as an asparagus style shoot. That also collects a really good price at a market. Holly is obviously an incredible understory native tree. So too a forest edge species like our crab apples or just normal apples, wild pears, hazel, all these types of things. They come into the understory brilliantly. But if you have a woodland, a broadleaf woodland, and you got spare wood going, get started with some shiitake mushrooms. They go really well underneath a woodland canopy. I know they're not plants, but you know they eat wood to bits, so that'd be quite fun. Right, so William, we are all converted. How do we make the rest of society see the benefits? This is, I'll probably finish on this one. That is that's something I've thought about a lot, and you could spend your entire life on that. You could spend your entire life trying to get everyone else to see what you're seeing, to see the future that we all are probably imagining together right now. I don't think that ends up making you a very happy person. I think all you can do is do your best and say it from your heart, and people will do what people will do. We need not to think about whether or not people are along for the ride. We just need to be the best versions of ourselves and do what we believe in. So hopefully that's taken us up to the time. Thank you very much once again for having me on, Lindsay. It's a huge, huge privilege. I hope to see you soon.